at the week in Westminster. That's at 2:30 here on BBC News. Hello, good afternoon. The Brexit Secretary Stephen Barclay has insisted the government will push ahead with the vote on the Brexit deal, which is scheduled to take place in the House of Commons on Tuesday, despite the possibility that Theresa May's proposals will be defeated. The former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson said this morning a defeat in Parliament could actually strengthen the Prime Minister's hand in getting a better deal from the European Union. Mr Johnson claimed there would be widespread cross-party support for the existing deal if the Irish backstop proposals were removed from it. Here's our political correspondent Nick Eardley.
After more than 2 years of arguments and negotiations, this week Parliament will pass its judgment whether to accept Theresa May's Brexit deal or to try for something else. With most in Westminster predicting defeat for the PM, some want the vote postponed. This morning the Brexit Secretary said that wouldn't happen.
The vote is going ahead, and that's because it is a good deal, it's the only deal. And it's important that we don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We move into uncharted waters. Yes, the Prime Minister is fighting for us and will continue in post. But the question for...
Can she stay on as Prime Minister?
Yes,
if
absolutely.
She can stay on as Prime Minister,
absolutely.
even if she loses the vote B.
Yes.
Since the UK voted to leave, taking back control has meant different things to different people. Delivering Brexit has been far from simple.
Do not underestimate the deep sense of personal responsibility I feel for Brexit and for everything that has happened. Do not underestimate how much I care about this, because this is fundamental to our country, and it absolutely breaks my heart to think that after all that we fought for, all that we campaigned for, all that Steve Barclay campaigned for, everybody believes in, that we should consign ourselves to a future in which the EU effectively rules us in many, many respects, and yet we have no say round the table in Brussels. That is an absurdity.
The PM says without a backstop to prevent a hard border in Ireland, there will be no deal. But Mr Johnson disagrees and argues Brussels might rethink.
Look at what Romano Prodi, the former EU Commission President, had to say yesterday. He said that if the House of Commons votes down this deal, which I earnestly hope that we do, then the EU will of course negotiate.
So far the EU has shown no willingness to do so. Mr Johnson was one of 3 senior Brexiteers who refused to rule out leadership bids this morning, a sign of how uncertain the next few weeks in politics will be. But Labour is planning its own takeover too.
When a government can't pass a key policy proposal such as this, I'd question their legitimacy to carry on. But alternatively, she could offer to renegotiate around a deal that would provide consensus within Parliament.
Whatever happens in the coming days, it's a crucial week in the Brexit process, and possibly for the future of British politics. Nick Eardley, BBC News.
Let's start with the future of the vote, and Jess Parker, our political correspondent, is with me. Jess, the prospects not looking any better at the end of the weekend than they were at the start of the weekend.
No, I mean, Theresa May still has a huge challenge. Around 100 Tory MPs have said they're not going to support her deal. We know that the arithmetic in Parliament, she'd have to be much smaller numbers than that in order to stand any realistic chance of getting this deal through. So, over the weekend, we've increasingly heard this idea that some people are trying to put pressure on Theresa May to say, don't go ahead with Tuesday because you're just going to lose. But at the moment, we've heard from Stephen Barclay, we're hearing from Number 10, that they are pressing ahead with Tuesday's vote. And so, automatically, because the numbers do look so bad, although you should never write off any possibility, because the numbers look so bad, everyone's beginning to talk about Plan B. Problem is, not everyone can agree what Plan B is.
And Plan B would also have to involve some kind of input from Brussels, presumably. I mean, a lot of people seem to have seized on these remarks from Romano Prodi on the PM programme on Radio 4 yesterday afternoon, where he said, look, when I was in charge of the European Commission, whenever a problem like this arose, of course it did with treaties being rejected and votes going against it, we always found a way. We offered something, we created some wiggle room. People seem to be holding out a confidence, that belief, certainly like Boris Johnson thought that was the case. How confident is Number 10 that it can go back to Brussels?
Number 10 government doesn't want to talk about that at the moment, obviously, because number 10 wants to say we still do have a chance of winning Tuesday's vote, and as soon as you start talking about plan Bs and other possibilities, it looks like you've lost confidence that you can win your own vote. But, you know, Brussels have been pretty clear that the withdrawal agreement is the deal on offer, and they've appeared pretty reluctant so far to consider renegotiating it in any way. And it has been pointed out as well, this is a very complicated agreement. To start tinkering with it isn't a particularly simple matter. However, as things stand, the reality is that they will potentially need to make some changes in order for this to possibly get through Parliament, unless something significant changes as things stand. And it's interesting, I was just listening to an interview with the Justice Minister, Rory Stewart, and he was making a couple of points. He was saying that the government should come back, should it lose Tuesday's vote, potentially with some small adjustments to the deal. Now, he's saying that wasn't necessarily going to be easy, but he was also saying that people like Boris Johnson, who are saying they're going to vote against the deal, need to be totally upfront about what it is that could change their mind, because there's no point going back to Brussels, renegotiating the deal and then losing again, by which point we will be incredibly close to that March date indeed.
And just finally, what about the Prime Minister's political authority? Because presumably some of those voices saying to her, don't hold the vote on Tuesday, are effectively saying if you hold the vote, it's shown how little support you have for this. Your own personal authority would be kind of wiped out. Is that a big worry for her supporters, that she will have been exposed in a way by the vote that will make it very hard for her to carry on?
Well, Theresa May, as ever, is between a rock and a hard place, isn't she? Because should she go ahead with the vote on Tuesday, and it looks very likely she will lose it, then she's going to be in serious trouble. Should she now, tomorrow, for example, declare that the vote is to be delayed, she again looks incredibly weak. So there aren't any easy options for Theresa May. And it looks, if you were speculating, that maybe there is this scheme going on whereby they bring the deal to Parliament, the arithmetic doesn't look good, and they try to go back to the European Union and say, look, if you want a deal, and you say you do, there's going to have to be some clarifications, some technical changes in order for this to stand a realistic chance. But of course, Theresa May, as ever, the other thing of speculation around her is her leadership itself, and whether a vote of no confidence could be called on her anytime soon, how many letters might be sent in to the chair of the Backbench 1922 committee. So it's by no means certain that should she lose Tuesday's vote, that there wouldn't be some sort of challenge to her. So that's just adding to the complication, the challenges for the Prime Minister.
It is going to be quite a week, whatever happens and however it ends. Jess Parker, thanks very much. In other news now, police in New Zealand investigating the murder of the British backpacker Grace Millane say they have found a body on the outskirts of Auckland, and they believe it is that of the 22-year-old from Essex. But so far there's been no formal identification. A man aged 26 has been charged with her murder. Phil Mercer has the details.
How and why Grace Millane died will be the focus of an intense investigation that New Zealand police say is far from over. A body found in a forest in the Waitakere Ranges, a beauty spot with hiking trails a short drive from Auckland, is thought to be that of the university graduate from Essex. Police say the remains were discovered close to a main road.
We located a body which we believe to be Grace. The formal identification process will now take place. However, based on the evidence we have gathered over the past few days, we expect that this is Grace. This brings the search for Grace to an end. It is an unbearable time for the Millane family, and our hearts go out to them.
Grace Millane was last seen on security video at a hotel in Auckland more than a week ago. The 26-year-old man she was with has been charged with her murder and is due in court tomorrow. The backpacker's father, David, arrived in New Zealand on Friday to make a public appeal for help in finding his daughter. He said she was fun-loving and outgoing. 11,000 miles away in England, there have been prayers for the family at their local church in Essex. Miss Millane graduated from Lincoln University in September. She'd been travelling alone in New Zealand for a fortnight, following a trip through South America. It was supposed to have been the adventure of a lifetime. Phil Mercer, BBC News, Sydney.
With me now, Simon Calder, travel editor of The Independent. Simon, it's every parent's nightmare when a child goes off solo for the first time, often travelling on their own or maybe only with one or two other friends. What are the statistics to put this terrible case in some sort of context?
Well, of course, my heart goes out to the parents of Grace. It's unimaginable what they are going through. If you look at the statistics, though, being a traveller from Britain abroad has never actually been safer. There are, very sadly, about 600 fatalities involving British holidaymakers, British travellers every year, but the vast majority are from road accidents, by far the leading cause, and also accidents in water.
And older people as well, presumably, whereas, of course, in this case like Grace, we're talking about youngsters going up.
Yes.
So the range of situations can be quite wide, presumably.
Well, quite. And, of course, particularly in somewhere like New Zealand, which has, of course, a great deal to offer anybody who's on a gap year, has very, very low crime rates. Now, the road accident rate is more than twice as bad as it is in Britain, but that's the kind of biggest threat. Of course, you need to take care in water. But for something like this to happen in a place like that is extremely rare, therefore, I would urge people who have got young people travelling around the world, the overwhelming odds are that they're going to have a fantastic time and come back with nothing but great stories to tell.
And what's striking about Grace's story as well, and kind of adds to the sort of poignancy of how her life has ended in such a terrible way, is that she had spent time travelling around a much more dangerous part of the world in a small group of friends without any incident.
Yes.
It's in a sense a reminder that if you take sensible precautions, most of the time you are going to be fine.
Well, yes, and there is this notion, of course, understandably, that there's safety in numbers, and certainly being a female alone, you are more vulnerable. Now, again, it doesn't necessarily mean that travelling solo is a bad idea, because if you're staying at a hostel, as Grace was in Auckland, then you automatically get to meet other travellers, you can team up with them and travel with them, and that works out really well for a lot of people. And there are a lot of technological solutions. For example, the Lucy Blackman Trust, which was set up after the terrible death of a young British woman in 2000 in Japan, says, right, what you need to do is keep a log of all the people you meet, their contact details, and every week email that to your folks and your friends together with your plans for the following week. And in New Zealand specifically, they have, all the telecom companies have a system where you can just text your details, where you're going, what your plans are, to a central database, and then if necessary that can be investigated.
So that's useful advice for that particular country. Simon Calder, thanks very much. In Paris, the clean-up began this morning after a day and night of more protests and violence by the so-called Yellow Vest movement. The French finance minister has said the violence is a catastrophe for the nation's commerce and economy and warned it will affect the growth rate. Amid the unrest, looting broke out and shops and storefronts were hit. Demonstrations arose over rising living costs and dissatisfaction with President Emmanuel Macron. Police arrested nearly 1,700 people in all, while more than 100 were injured and needed hospital treatment. It's been reported in French media that the President will make a major announcement in the coming week in a televised address. Lucy Williamson reports from Paris on a night of trouble.
They called it a protest. At times it looked more like a game of urban war. Groups of protesters fanned through. From the Arc de Triomphe to République, boulevards once built to open the veins of the city, filled with tear gas, burning vehicles and riot police. The police were well prepared for this confrontation, with armoured vehicles, new tactics and bag searches, seizing gas masks and helmets and anything that could be used against police. The tear gas, far stronger than usual, took many protesters by surprise. And rapid reaction squads, marked out by orange armbands, were stationed among the protesters to spot trouble and make early arrests. Despite the violence of previous protests, this movement still has the backing of many voters in France. Its members proud of their lack of leadership and the diversity of their support. But this movement is already splintering into two kinds of protest. One that looks towards a new political programme, and a violent wing opposed to any negotiation that's hard to exclude, even harder to control. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
French Foreign Minister has urged President Donald Trump not to interfere in France's domestic politics after the US President posted a tweet about the protests. In his tweet, Mr. Trump said it was a very sad day and night in Paris. Maybe it's time to end the ridiculous and extremely expensive Paris Agreement, which was, of course, about climate change, the President tweeted, and return money back to the people in the form of lower taxes. Well, in response, Jean-Yves Le Drian said, "We do not take domestic American politics into account, and we want that to be reciprocated. Leave our nation be." Right, let's take a look at the headlines now at 16 minutes past 2. Downing Street says MPs will vote on Theresa May's Brexit agreement on Tuesday, as Boris Johnson insists the UK can negotiate a better deal. One body has been found by police investigating the murder of the British backpacker Grace Millane in New Zealand. France's Prime Minister has called for unity as 1,700 people are arrested over a fourth weekend of violent protests. And back to Brexit, there are a number of demonstrations taking place today. The founder of the English Defence League, Tommy Robinson, is joining a pro-Brexit march in central London, which has been organised by UKIP. A counter-protest against what it calls far-right extremists is being organised to take place at the same time. Both demonstrations are taking place close to one another. Our correspondent Richard Galpin is with the pro-Brexit demonstrators.
Well, this is just one of several rallies and marches taking place here in London today, 2 days ahead of the all-important vote in Parliament on Brexit, in which obviously decided whether they accept Theresa May's deal, which she's agreed with Brussels. Now, this is being organised by UKIP, the UK Independence Party, a right-wing party which is very much behind Brexit, but they're not happy with the deal which the British Prime Minister has agreed with Brussels, and they want to get out of the European Union completely. Now, there are other rallies taking place by Remainers and people who want to have a second referendum on Brexit. Now, here there is an edge in the sense that a far-right activist called Tommy Robinson is here. You can hear them chanting his name now. He's been accused of being a fascist, of being a racist, charges, of course, which he denies. So obviously everyone will be looking out to see what happens later today.
Richard Galpin, well, our correspondent James Waterhouse is with the counter-demonstration, and we can join him on that march now. What sort of numbers, James, do we think are taking part in that protest?
I think we're looking at no more than a couple of thousand if one dares to make an estimate in this scenario. But as you can see, it's quite the cauldron. It's not as simple as a pro versus Brexit, a pro-Brexit versus anti-Brexit demonstration. There are pockets of that, but the main gripe, if you like, amongst this group of protesters is the central character in the other Brexit betrayal march, Tommy Robinson. As far as counter-protests go, this is quite large in size. You know, being 2,000, you can see they've all gathered here on Whitehall, over the top of the stage where people have been giving speeches and playing music. There's about a 100-metre long peace barrier that police have put in place, sealing off the half. And on the other side, you've got Parliament Square, where the other march has ended up. They started actually at the BBC headquarters further up in the West End of London, and there have been flashpoints on the way down. Opposing marchers have blocked the route, they've antagonised protesters from the sidelines, but it's really worth mentioning the size of the police operation, which has enabled these protesters to end up here on Whitehall with relatively little drama.
So presumably the key challenge for the police is not only to have kept them apart here and now while the two demonstrations are taking place, but also to ensure that when they disperse, they're kept separate then too.
You've got to say it's a pretty sizable job they've got. I mean, from what down here, there have been splinter groups going off. There are some masked protesters here that have gone off to Trafalgar Square, and there have been sort of confrontations. And what we have seen is police respond very quickly and in numbers, which has, on the whole, neutralised most scenarios. But as you say, we're set to have speeches here for the next hour or so, and then crowds will naturally disperse. The question is whether these flashpoints that we've seen so far this afternoon continue.
James Woodhouse there on the, down by the Cenotaph. Thanks very much. A teenager has been stabbed to death in southeast London. Police say the 18-year-old died at the scene after suffering stab injuries during an incident at a residential address in Greenwich. A 17-year-old boy has been arrested in connection with the death. The police are studying video footage thought to show racial abuse being aimed at the Manchester City player Raheem Sterling. The incident was highlighted following the match between Chelsea and City at Stamford Bridge yesterday. Raheem Sterling has said some newspapers help to fuel racism by the way in which they portray young black players. President Trump is looking for his third chief of staff after announcing that John Kelly is leaving the post at the end of this month. It's not clear why the former Marine General is stepping down, but US media reports speak of growing disagreements with the President. General Kelly has been in the role since the end of July last year, and he becomes the 28th member of the administration's senior staff to have resigned or been fired so far since Mr. Trump took office.
John Kelly will be leaving, I don't know if I can say retiring, but he's a great guy. John Kelly will be leaving at the end of the year. We'll be announcing who will be taking John's place. It might be on an interim basis. I'll be announcing that over the next day or two.
That's President Trump announcing the departure of John Kelly as Chief of Staff. We may get an announcement on that later today. Tens of thousands of Hindu protesters have marched through the capital, New Delhi, calling for a temple to be built on the ruins of a destroyed mosque in the city of Ayodhya. The site was home to a mosque for 460 years until Hindu extremists attacked and destroyed it in 1992. That led to riots across the country, which left thousands of people dead. Its future has been tied up in court cases for decades. There was tight security for the demonstration, and protesters say they'll not let up until the temple gets the go-ahead. Last night, thousands of people spent the night sleeping out in the cold in parks across Scotland to draw attention to homelessness. It remains an issue there. Some new projects are underway to try and help those who, for whatever reason, find themselves living on the streets. Lorna Gordon reports.
The distinctive skyline of Scotland's capital city. But look a bit closer, and in amongst the Christmas lights and shoppers, another side.
So many people going past you and looking at you like you're a piece of dirt, basically.
After going into debt, Jade says she lost her home, her children, her hope.
There's been days I've been wanting to kill myself and everything because I'm lying here. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, I really wouldn't. Like, I had the worst upbringing ever, so I thought my life was going to be okay, and like I would have my kids, my husband, my partner, I just never got nothing.
With high rents and a lack of affordable housing, the charity Shelter warns that Edinburgh is at risk of a housing crisis comparable to London. Those without a roof of their own, staying in B&Bs, temporary accommodation, in some areas bedding down beneath the city streets.
I've lived in Edinburgh for nearly 30 years, and 24 of those were middle class with an owner, company and 3 beautiful kids and a beautiful wife and all that kind of good stuff.
Now home for Guy is a graveyard, the living sleeping alongside the dead.
So I was living under the railway bridge for 10 days and that got flooded out. And so I moved in here. This site has always been used as a site for homeless people. The most important ingredient, as you can see, and today is a great example, is it's dry.
Childhood trauma, alcohol and drug problems, mental health issues, debt. The reasons people end up sleeping rough can be complex, but on the outskirts of Edinburgh, a small village dedicated to people who have been homeless and who are free of addiction.
The crucial thing with this village is we're not saying this is the one and only answer, we're saying this is a small part of a jigsaw of various solutions that are required to tackle homelessness, but all of them have the same parallels, which is a nice place where you feel of value, that you have a place to call home.
Come in. Thank you. This is your home. The aim here to give residents like Murray the time, stability and support to get back on their feet.
It's given me hope, ultimately. It's given me a space where I can feel safe, warm, supported. The future's bright for me.
These challenges are not unique to Edinburgh, and there are plans to build thousands more affordable homes. But the attempt here to also try a different approach in tackling homelessness is being watched by other cities and could soon be seen elsewhere. Lorna Gordon, BBC News, Edinburgh.
Right, let's take a look at the weather prospects now, and Susan Powell is the map. Afternoon to you, Susan. It looks all right for the demonstrators today, considering how the day started off in London.
You're exactly right. We have had a pretty wet start with the weather front pushing its way south, but skies have cleared, the sun has come out, and for many that's the way we'll finish off our day, with a little bit of brightness. Just a few showers lingering further west though, across the northwest of England and for North Wales, and a few more wintry ones for Scotland. It's a little bit on the fresh side though, particularly across the eastern side of the country, where we've got the northerly wind clipping in to the North Sea coast. 11 degrees for Cardiff and London through the afternoon. Heading to the evening, the showers widespread a bit more for a time across Northern Ireland before clearing through the small hours of Monday. They'll tend to linger across the northwest. To the north, with clear skies though, a chilly night in prospect, widespread frost for Scotland. Cold start to the new week, frosty too for Northern England and parts of East Anglia, milder towards the southwest. As for Monday, a lot of fine weather to come. A light breeze still coming in from the north, so still keeping things a little chilly feeling perhaps. Towards the west, more cloud for the second half of the day, bringing some light rain or drizzle. Better the sunshine in at the east, 4 degrees in Aberdeen, up to 10 in London.
Some days of the week are just different. Get your fill of tech, travel, sport and documentaries. Weekends on the BBC News Channel.
Say daddy. Dada. Say mama. Dada. What happens in the first 2 years of life lays the foundation for everything to come.
A baby is born with about 50 trillion connections in their brain.
You can see the brainwaves changing in real time.
No, don't touch.
We're about to discover the complexity and sheer genius of how we all grow up.
How you became you. Babies, Their Wonderful World continues tomorrow at 9 on BBC Two.
It's all coming down to this place, the Commons. The government's agreed a Brexit deal, but can MPs be persuaded to back it? We'll bring you all the key moments as the House debates the deal and the result of that crucial, meaningful vote. Stay tuned to the BBC News Channel for every Brexit development.
Hello, this is BBC News with Sean Lay. The headlines this hour. No delay to the vote. Downing Street insists Tuesday's crucial Commons division will go ahead, as the Prime Minister warns the UK will be in uncharted waters if MPs reject her Brexit deal. Leading Brexiteer Boris Johnson tells the BBC the vote should go ahead, but he insists the UK could negotiate a better settlement with the European Union.
We have to change it. It's a relatively simple job to do. We can have a withdrawal agreement that does not contain the backstop. We can do much, much better than this.
Police in New Zealand investigating the murder of the British backpacker Grace Millane say they have found a body. More than 1,700 arrests in France after another night of violence. Police used tear gas and rubber bullets on the streets of Paris. France's Prime Minister calls for unity. The US, Russia and other countries criticise an IPCC study into the impact that a 1.5-degree rise in global temperatures would have on the world as the UN Climate Change Conference continues in Poland. Now on BBC News, it's time for the Week in Parliament.
Hello there and welcome to the Week in Parliament. With the crucial vote on her EU withdrawal deal looming, Theresa May appeals to MPs to support her plan.
I ask you to back it in the best interests of our constituents and our country. And with my whole heart, I commend this motion to the House.
But Labour's clear it won't accept the deal.
The Prime Minister has seen these negotiations only as an exercise in the internal management of the Conservative Party.
Also on this programme, Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May clash over the state of the welfare state. And peers reckon the public will be angry if they don't get a vote on Theresa May's Brexit deal.
Why did you deny me the chance to become familiar with those facts and then express my opinion again? Why did you take that from me and deny it to me?
But first, it was another week of drama at Westminster.
The ayes to the right, 307. The noes to the left, 311.
A week of dismay for ministers.
The ayes to the right, 311. The noes to the left, 293.
And a week of defeat for the government.
The ayes to the right, 321. The noes to the left, 299. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
On Tuesday, in the space of just over an hour, Theresa May suffered 3 defeats in the Commons. The first 2 came as MPs debated, then agreed a Labour move, accusing ministers of being in contempt or frustrating Parliament by failing to publish in full the legal opinion on the Brexit deal. An SNP MP made clear why the opposition wouldn't be placated by the version the government had given them instead.
They are placing themselves above Parliament. They are placing themselves in contempt of Parliament. And as for the legal position document published yesterday that was going to fix it all, that could hardly have been more patronising if they'd had pictures to colour in and rejoin the dots puzzles every so often just to keep us interested.
And then, just moments before Theresa May was to speak, came that third defeat, as a cross-party group of MPs, spearheaded by the Conservative former Attorney General Dominic Grieve, succeeded in giving the Commons the right to say what should happen next if her Brexit deal is voted down on Tuesday.
It is contrary to all sensible practice, and I have to say, slightly disrespectful of the role of this House, that we should end up with a situation in which we have unamendable motions for consideration at a time when the Parliament ought to be fully focused on trying to find means of resolving outstanding issues.
And he had support from the Labour MP who chairs the Brexit Committee.
It is essential that the House of Commons has the opportunity, if the deal is voted down next Tuesday, to give itself a voice to express a view about what happens next. And what the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman's amendment does, as we've just heard, is to remove the obstacle to that, and I hope the whole of the House will vote for it.
And sure enough, the government was defeated by 22 votes, the third defeat for the government in just one day. It all made for an uncomfortable backdrop for the Prime Minister, who less than a minute later got up to make one of the most crucial speeches of her career, as she tried to persuade MPs to back her deal in the vote on Tuesday.
To all sides of the debate, to every member in every party, I say that this deal deserves your support for what it achieves for all of our people and our whole United Kingdom. One union of 4 nations, now and in the future. And this is a debate about our future. It's not about whether we could have taken a different road in the past, but which road we should take from here. If we put aside our differences and remember what unites us, if we broker an honourable compromise in the interest not of ourselves, but of those we were sent here to serve, together and do our duty to our constituents, then we will pass the test that history has set for us today. It's not easy when the passions run so deep, but looking around this chamber, I know we can meet this moment. So I promise you today, this is the very best deal for the British people. I ask you to back it in the best interests of our constituents and our country. And with my whole heart, I commend this motion to the House.
The Prime Minister has seen these negotiations only as an exercise in the internal management of the Conservative Party, and that did not work out very well at all. When the two previous Brexit secretaries, who theoretically at least led the negotiations, well, they did theoretically, say they cannot support the deal, how can she expect anyone else in this House or in this country to have faith in a deal that's been rejected by 2 of the people that were involved in the negotiation of it?
Throughout the entire negotiating period, the UK government has treated Scotland with contempt. Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain, yet the will of the Scottish people means nothing. Yes. Absolutely nothing to this Prime Minister. Instead of engaging meaningfully with Scotland during this critical time. The Prime Minister chose last-minute photocalls and stage-managed events in Scotland, all smoke and mirrors, to dress up the fact that her government couldn't care less about Scotland, and we can see it tonight.
To enter into this arrangement as has been put forward, first through the transition period as proposed and then the backstop provisions, means we enter a twilight world where the EU is given unprecedented powers over the UK, certainly in the transition period, and massive leverage in the negotiations on the future trade relationship. And we would have to rely on the goodwill of others to let us ever leave these arrangements. So under these terms, in my view, the UK's future as a strong and independent global trading nation standing together is in real and imminent jeopardy.
The brutal truth is that the country is bitterly divided. And it will be bitterly divided if we leave under the terms that the government has negotiated. We will be entering into a set of conditions in which the economy will deteriorate relative to what it would have been in the European Union. A younger generation are coming through who will bear the brunt of the costs, most of whom voted to remain in the European Union. An estimated 80% of 18-year-olds wishes to remain. There will be great bitterness and resentment about what the older generation has imposed on them. This issue will not go away.
And when the debate went over to the backbenches, the divisions within parties and across the Commons became all too clear.
I really can't believe that there is a single member of this House who sincerely believes that this deal we have before us is a good deal for the UK.
I sincerely believe it. I've got no stake in this government anymore, but I still think it's the right thing to do.
The Right Honourable Member was a senior member of Vote Leave. He was Foreign Secretary for 2 years. We are in this mess because of him. Does he take no responsibility?
The fact is that I'm afraid I was not able to continue to support this process for precisely that reason.
The deal on offer. As the Prime Minister says, the only deal on offer does not recover our sovereignty. It leaves us rule takers from the European Union without any voice in shaping those rules.
The former Universities Minister spoke for the first time since his resignation.
Because voting for this withdrawal agreement, giving the public the impression that this is the best compromise and there are no problems further down the line, this is Brexit done. When they wake up and see that Britain is being hobbled and crippled in those negotiations, that would also disappoint voters, and that would also be corrosive of our politics.
Theresa May did have backing from some. One Conservative praised her courage and dogged pursuit of a deal.
I'm sure that there are many right honourable and honourable members on both sides of this House who remember Lewis Carroll's wonderful poem, The Hunting of the Snark, which includes the following lines, which I believe are appropriate. The principal failing occurred in the sailing, and the bellman, perplexed and distressed, said he had hoped at least, when the wind blew due east, that the ship would not travel due west. Mr. Speaker, to coin a phrase from a greater, kinder and more resolute period in our national life, come, let us go forward together and settle this now.
The Lords also began a debate on the EU withdrawal deal and our proposed future relationship with the EU. One of the early speakers was the Archbishop of Canterbury, who warned that the UK could drift into no deal.
There is a significant danger of adverse economic effect, with a fall in government revenue, rise in unemployment and greater poverty. Some will argue that is only going to be temporary. But we need to remember that for those in poverty, temporary is an eternity.
No deal is completely unacceptable. The May deal is completely unacceptable. And when people turn around and say, look, the British Party are weary of Brexit, they just want it over. That might be true for this minute. But I tell you, when they face the consequences of Brexit and see the impact on their lives, that will be forgotten in a flash. And there will be huge anger. And they will turn to people in this House and the other and say, when the facts were on the table, why did you deny me the chance to become familiar with those facts and then express my opinion again. Why did you take that from me and deny it to me?
I am concerned as to what might happen if we had a second referendum. What could the result be? If the result were to be 52-48 Remain, would the Leavers be content? If the result is the same as last time, on what grounds are we remaining? This deal or another deal? And if we've got 3 questions on the ballot paper, what happens if all are rejected?
Lady Taylor. So the big vote is due on Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Earlier I spoke to Sir David Beamish, a former clerk of the Parliament, one of Parliament's top experts on procedure. I began by asking him about the significance of that Dominic Grieve amendment, the third of those defeats suffered by Theresa May, which gives MPs more say if the EU withdrawal deal is voted down on Tuesday.
This allows amendments to be tabled, which means that the members of the House of Commons will have the opportunity to put